Ball. That's accurate.
Oh. Wow.
So we are on the third lesson here. We had kind of had the intro a couple weeks ago, and then last week we were looking at some of the evidence of the witnesses and the reliability of the witnesses to the resurrection. So in this one, what we're going to be kind of looking at is dealing with some of the objections that people make regarding what they claim are inconsistencies in the gospel accounts. I'll start with this quote here on the top of your page. The meaning of the resurrection is a theological matter, but the fact of the resurrection is a historical matter. The nature of the resurrection body of Jesus may be a mystery, but the fact that the body disappeared from the tomb is a matter to be decided upon by historical evidence. What he's saying by that is, sometimes like a unbeliever might say, it's not up to like scientists or historians to comment on the resurrection of Jesus because it's a religious matter. But Wilbur Smith is pretty clear what it means, biblically speaking. But it is all sorts of historical evidence. That's what he means by that. So let's start by looking at these passages. 2 Peter 1:16. Dan, if you got that.
I think we do.
Go ahead.
For we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty.
So we're going to ask this with each of these questions. What does this verse indicate about the nature of the testimony given by the followers of Jesus? Yeah. Now, in this particular verse, he's referring to what? What specific event is he referencing in this verse?
His resurrection.
Actually not.
Oh, Mount.
Yes, transfiguration, which is a foretelling of his resurrection. And also you'll remember Jesus told the disciples at that time not to tell anyone about it until he had risen from the dead. So it's absolutely connected with his resurrection. The fact that Peter is telling people about it right now is because he is also seeing Jesus rise from the dead. But yeah, his point is we didn't follow something somebody else told us. This wasn't some cleverly designed myth that we heard. We were eyewitnesses of these things. We talked about some of that last week, why that's important. What about Luke 1:1-4? Chris, whenever you have that, if you'd like to read it.
Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seems good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, okay, that you may have certainty concerning the things that you have been taught.
Thank you. This is an interesting thing here. So Luke, who's Luke, by the way? Where do we know him elsewhere in the Bible?
Wasn't he a doctor?
He was. Paul refers to him as the beloved physician. I think it's Paul that says that, yeah. And we find him in the book of Acts following along with Paul. And he's also kind of famous for, because Luke also wrote Acts. Luke and Acts are 2 volumes. He treats them that way. They're a 2-volume set. And both are addressed to this Theophilus. So Theophilus, we believe, is probably a wealthy Christian who's financing the writing and copying of the gospel and then Acts. So that's why he addresses it to him. We think something like that is going on, right? Other people have suggested Theophilus is just a generic name for any Christian, since Theophilus means friend of God. But we tend not to think that. I don't think that's as likely as the other one. Anyway, Luke is also kind of famous because there's a certain point in the middle of Acts where the pronouns switch. Instead of talking about they, that company and where they were going, all of a sudden starts saying we. Because he goes along with Paul on some of his journeys. And so Luke is not one of the 12, nor is he even, to anything that we know, one of the 70 or the larger group of disciples that followed Jesus around. He's not there during Jesus' ministry. So how can he write a gospel? Well, what does he say he did in these 4 verses?
He followed all things closely.
Yeah, he's been paying attention to this. He's following all things closely, and he talked to people. Namely, he talked to the apostles. He references them as the eyewitnesses who ministered the word to us. And so he said, all right, it seemed good to me. I'm going to go around, he's interviewing everybody. He's listening to what the eyewitnesses are saying. He's taking it down and he's writing. In other words, Luke is a
Prophet.
Well, he's that too, because he's also inspired by God. Absolutely. But in earthly terms, he's a journalist / historian. Yeah, absolutely. That's what he's doing. He's writing the history. And that's the way he presents it. And he also is very clear that this is inspired by the Holy Spirit as well. The Holy Spirit is using Luke's process. But it's important to know that it's not Luke writing this on his own authority. He's writing what the witnesses said. And, that's an important point for a lot of reasons. And one of them is that, you'll have some Christians who will try to claim, well, the Bible never intended to be taken as a historical book. I beg to differ. It often makes that claim quite clearly, and here's one place where it does so. Okay, John 1, verse 1. Sorry, 1 John 1, verse 1. Go ahead with that, Michael, when you get there.
That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands, concerning the word of life.
All right, what does this indicate about the nature of the testimony given by the followers of Jesus?
Firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. Literally firsthand. And he's like, we saw it. We touched it. We were there. I have to think that part of what John has in mind here is that account that he especially records in the upper room with with Jesus showing his hands and sides and then Thomas touching it. The language is so, that which is from the beginning, that's Jesus. And notice how this is similar to the beginning of his gospel. In the beginning was the word. Now, that which is from the beginning, which we have heard, we heard him talking firsthand, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon and have touched with our very hands. All right, so yeah, they're all eyewitnesses. And, it's important. That's letter B. Why is this important? Well, it's important because it assures us the accounts are trustworthy. It's not something that's only myth. It's not intended to be taken as myth. It's also really easy to tell the difference. Have you guys ever read mythology of various sorts? Like Norse mythology, right, or Greek mythology? It does not read like this. It's always, first of all, they don't make claims that are of a historical nature generally. The people, you can tell, they're folk tales. There's a very obvious sense of that to them. And then they always say preposterous things. I don't mean preposterous in the sense of just miracles, but just bizarre and crazy stuff. One of the Norse mythologies, what is Thor like? Thor drinks a horn of beer that's endless or something. Something like that happens, right? All this weird stuff that doesn't even make sense, right? How can you drink a endless horn of beer, and this is this great feat of strength, right? Of a god to drink an endless ale or whatever. So there's a very obvious difference between that and between this. All right, this is important as we're looking at the gospel writers then too, to understand that they do mean to be taken as historical and that they're trustworthy. And for that, we should also examine them closely. So let's look at each of the narratives below and make note of the differences among the 4 accounts. So we're going to all turn to each one of these gospels in turn and read through it and notice these questions as we go through and fill it in if you got a pen or a pencil if you want. First one being how many women? When did they come? Why did they come? Who did they meet? What did they do? So let's go to Matthew 28, 1 to 10. And if you would like a pen and don't have one, I'm pretty sure there are some out there in various locations. So, once everybody's there, we could probably just, let's see. We could just take turns reading a couple verses at a time. So, Mark, if you start, read 2, and then we'll just go around. Go ahead, Mark.
Now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow.
You, if you want to go ahead, Joe, or anybody who's ready.
I'm sorry, what verse was that?
We're on verse 4 now.
And for the fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell the disciples that he has risen from the dead. And behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you."
Miriam, if you want to do up through verse 10 now.
So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me."
Okay, so according to Matthew here, how many women came? 2. Mary, it says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. And which Mary that is, we don't know, because there are a lot of Marys. In fact, it's one of the things that some people will point out is actually a step of veracity here. Because there were a lot of Marys in those days, and it's not unusual for there to have been a whole bunch of Marys in a group of people. But it'd be pretty weird if somebody decided to make up this account, and they're like, "I know what'll sell it. We'll have everyone named Mary." Yeah, so there's 2. And when did they come? Yeah, after Sabbath, and then toward the dawn. So one thing to know here about what that means is, when does the Sabbath end? Saturday night at 6 o'clock. So that's the first time marker. It's sometime after Saturday at 6. That's when Sunday starts. That's when the first day starts. It's our Saturday night at 6. But then it also adds toward the dawn. What exactly does toward the dawn mean? I think this will be filled in a little bit for us as we look through the other Gospels. But keep in mind that that phrase is a little bit flexible, isn't it? Toward the dawn. I think we'll gain some understanding of what is meant by that as we look at the other ones. Why did they come? To see the tomb, it says. Who did they meet? An angel, it says. One angel, according to this. It doesn't say one, it just says an angel, right? An angel, and he said this to them, etc. Guards fell. Angel spoke to the women, and then what did they do? Yeah, ran to tell his disciples. And yes, they ran into Jesus. They met Jesus. Well, actually, Jesus met them. Also notice that there isn't, in that thing right there, isn't a great deal of time markers. It says that they went to tell the disciples. It says that Jesus met them. It doesn't actually specify when that happened, right? It says that those two things both happened. It seems like he's saying that Jesus met them on the way, and that may be, but it's important to note exactly what the gospel writers do specify and what they don't specify, because they're not always interested in laying down the exact chronology of a thing, because they are primarily teaching about the meaning of the resurrection. So they may group some things together for the purpose of making their theological point and not care that it's not necessarily the exact chronological order. I'm not saying that that's what's happening here, but that is a thing that happens sometimes. So, Now let's go to Mark 16, 1 to 11. One thing to note here is that probably, I don't know if shoes were, I think it's likely that verses 9 through 20 are not original. The gospel probably ends at verse 8 in Mark. The rest of it may have been added. That's not proven, but that's just from looking at different manuscripts and stuff. Although at the same time, there is some strong evidence for its inclusion. It's a little bit misleading when it says, this is technically true, but if you got it there, after verse 8, it probably says some of the earliest manuscripts do not include 16, 9 to 20. Okay, that's true, but some people put too much stock in some of the oldest manuscripts. Here's why. When we look at manuscript evidence, we embrace the ancient and widespread principle. What I mean by that is this. There's essentially 5 regions where Greek manuscripts are being copied. And what we want to do is we want to start by figuring out, all right, we have these 2 different variants. In this case, it would be those manuscripts that contain verses 9 to 20 and those that don't. We want to look, how many of these regions is this popping up in, and how long ago is it popping up? So if you look at it and say, well, it's not there in this oldest manuscript that we have, in this region, and this region, and then it pops up way later in these other 2, that might be pretty good evidence that it got added. However, here's the wrench in the chain. The oldest manuscripts that we have are from Egypt. However, we also are pretty sure that they're some of the least reliable manuscripts that we have. And the reason is that they weren't, in Egypt, they weren't nearly as, it didn't last as long. They were copying of the manuscripts. And so we don't have very many of them. When you don't have very many from an area, it's hard to get a sense of how good the copying was and different things like that. Well, by contrast, in the place where Greek New Testaments were copied longest was in Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire. It held way longer. Like Alexandria and Egypt, different places like that were overthrown and conquered by Muslims way earlier than Constantinople was. Or like take Rome. Rome stopped using Greek. They used a Latin translation. That's not helpful for manuscript evidence. Well, Constantinople's doing this until, when's the fall of Constantinople? 1200 something? Something like that, right? Long time, okay? Well, here's what happens. They were very studious about copying, and they would destroy the old ones when they made new ones. That means that we don't have super old ones. So some people will be like, those ones from Byzantium, they're not as reliable as those ones from Egypt because they're not as old. But then you're like, yeah, but they represent a huge tradition of copying. There's a good argument to be made that they're much more reliable than the ones from Egypt. Now some people will just say, oh, those like 2 that we found in Egypt trump everything because they're older. But that's not necessarily a good way of looking at it. There's more balance to it than that. Anyway,
the fact that there are variants like that, doesn't that call into question the veracity of
yeah,
Scripture?
That's what some people like to say, but something we should do an in-depth study on this because it's really fascinating actually how much it actually proves the veracity of Scripture. Because people will be like, there's so many differences. First, if you compare the number of manuscript differences total that exist in the New Testament, your New Testament, versus any other ancient document, there are far fewer compared to anything else, even though there's way more copies. For instance, if you take Homer's like Iliad and Odyssey, which are older, were not copied as many times. There are large sections of the Iliad and Odyssey that we don't have. We had to just fill them in and guess, because they're just missing. And there's way more things, and the differences are way greater. So the other thing is, if you take all of the manuscript differences in the New Testament, 99.9% of them don't change the meaning of the sentence. And of the remaining tiny fraction that actually change the meaning of the sentence, none of them change a single doctrine of the Bible. So even if it might change what one verse is saying, from like this doctrine to that doctrine, but it isn't changing it to some other doctrine that isn't known elsewhere, if you follow what I'm saying, which is really, really, really astounding. You don't find that sort of preservation of ancient documents anywhere else. It's amazing. But it's absolutely a testament to what Jesus said. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word will never pass away. He's going to preserve his word. Okay, so let's look at Mark 16, 1 to 11 then. And I'll start reading there, and then we'll pass it around. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. I guess we could pause right there. How many women? 3 women. You know, this time we have 2 Marys, and then we have Salome added. And when did they come? Yeah, when Sabbath was passed. Again, the only thing that nails down is sometime after 6 p.m. on Saturday. But we have one more note. I'll read the next verse. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. Okay. So the most specific thing we have there is it's very early, and then when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb.
So really, verse 1 just says, after the Sabbath they bought the spices, and in the morning they went.
Yes, correct. Thank you. Yes. And that's important too because, yeah, they couldn't buy the spices on the Sabbath. They went and bought them and prepared them Saturday night. After the Sabbath was over, then Sunday morning they go. And when they come to the tomb, and notice again, this is important, it's when the sun had risen that they come to the tomb, according to this. So, Dan, if you want to read the next two verses, and then we'll keep passing it down. We're on verse 3.
Starting with 3.
Yes.
And they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe. And they were alarmed.
Chris, if you want to go ahead.
And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you.
Michael, next couple of verses.
And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons.
Mark?
She went and told those who had been with him, as they mourned and wept. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it.
Okay, according to this one, why did they come?
To anoint the body.
Yeah, clearly, because they're talking about who will roll away the stone. So they want to get into the tomb, and it mentions that they prepared the spices. So they come to anoint body. Okay, and who did they meet? Young man in a white robe. Yep.
Most likely an angel, right?
Definitely an angel. Yeah, this is one of those things. We'll talk about this more, but these atheists are nitpickers. All right, they think that things are huge contradictions when they're not. Is it very easy to imagine one gospel writer specifically referring to the angel, another one calling him a young man? Yes, because the angel appeared in the form of a man. They often do. That's consistent in the Bible. Is that the angel? Is the angel's normal shape to look like a man? I don't know, but they usually look like that. Sometimes they look different. Maybe there appear to also be different sorts of angels, but it is not biblically unusual. It is consistent with the Bible for them to appear looking like a man. Put it that way. And he says the same thing. It's clearly the same person, or the same entity, whatever you want to say. All right, what did they do? Went out and fled from the tomb and said nothing to anyone. went out, fled, and said nothing. However, notice it doesn't say how long they said nothing. They certainly said things to someone sometime. They were not mute for the rest of their lives. He doesn't give a temporal marker there. So this is another thing that some of them are going to nitpick at. We'll see later.
So did Mary Magdalene make 2 trips?
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, let's look at the other gospel accounts first.
Okay.
Luke, and by the way, that second, you're kind of talking about with Mark, verses 9 through 11 there. Again, some people think that this is a summary that was added. Either way, what's referring to with him appearing to Mary first is what we're going to see when we get to John. So that'll kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. Let's look to Luke 24, 1 to 12. I think Mark read last, so Joe, if you want to go ahead and read 2 verses, or if it, verse 2 ends with a comma, so finish the sentence in verse 3, etc., and then go on.
But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they went to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus.
Okay, pause for a second. How many women?
Doesn't say.
So far it doesn't say, it just says they. I think we're going to find later here. And when? Yeah, first day, which is Sunday, early dawn. And why? They brought the spices they had prepared, right? So they're going to anoint the body. All right. Miriam, go ahead with verses, 4 through 5.
Alright. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in dazzling apparel. And as they were frightened and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee."
Go ahead, Hannah.
That the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise. And they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and all the rest.
And now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them as an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home, marveling at what had happened. Okay, so how many women was it?
This one was like
3 plus. Mary, Joanna, and the other women. 3 plus. And it mentions that these are the ones that came and told these things to the apostles. Who did they meet?
2 men in dazzling.
2 men in dazzling apparel.
Probably angels too. Right?
Yes. What did they do?
They left and told these things to the apostles.
Yep, went and told 2 apostles. Okay. All right, now John 21 to 18. There's a battle of wills going on between those 2 right there. He's like, and he's like, when you get there, Dan, why don't you go ahead and start reading a couple verses.
Now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him."
Okay, in this one, how many women?
1.
1. When?
Well, it was still dark.
Early, while it was dark. I like how.
It does specify that she did not go inside.
Yes. Saw the stone. Well, actually, it just says she saw the stone had been taken away and that she ran. It doesn't say whether or not she went inside, right?
Sure.
It seems like she didn't,
Right.
but it doesn't really specify. And she went to tell Simon Peter and the other disciple, and then they run to come. Okay. Doesn't say with her why she came, does it? Just says that she came. All right, Chris, why don't you continue with verses 3 through 5.
So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in.
Michael, 6 through 10.
Then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead.
Mark, 10 through 12.
Then the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet.
Joe, 13 through 14.
They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus.
Hannah, 15 through 16.
Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away."
One more.
Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher.
And Miriam, 17 through 18.
Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord, and that he has said these things to her."
Okay. Why did they come? Doesn't really say. Who did they meet? Or who did Mary meet?
The two angels.
2 angels and then Jesus. 2 angels and then Jesus. And then what did she do? What did she do?
Went and told the disciples that
Yeah.
she had seen Jesus.
Yeah. And actually, first she tells Peter and John. She tells Peter and John after just seeing the tomb. This one's more complicated. Tells P and J. I'm going to write in. Then later all disciples. Oh, really? Okay, do these differences mean that the accounts contradict each other? Why or why not? We're going to kind of have to deal with these one at a time. Let's start with how many women. All right? Matthew says 2, Mark says 3, Luke says 3 plus, John says 1. Is there a contradiction there?
I feel like it could be like John's is like more specifically telling Mary Magdalene's story, where it's like she could have brought other women back, the other women could have been walking back and
Right.
whatever, and they just specifically wanted to tell her side of the story since it was so specific with her seeing Jesus and everything.
Right. So one thing that's important about that with John is John has makes a consistent point in his gospel of presenting one-on-one encounters with Jesus. Does it over and over and over throughout the gospel. He's doing it with Mary Magdalene too. It's the main storytelling method that he uses for teaching about Jesus. Because he's saying to you, he's bringing you face to face with Jesus. He wants to stick you in their shoes, is what he's doing. So absolutely. You can take that same thing then and think about it with the others. When Matthew says that there were 2 women, he doesn't say there weren't others. If there were 3, there were also 2. If there were 3 plus, there was also one, right? There was exactly this many and no more. It's just the specific number that they were mentioning. Now, there's also something else here that's a good possibility to keep in mind, and you touched on it too with Mary. Mary Magdalene is the name that is mentioned most throughout these. I think every one of them mentions her. And then there's various others that are mentioned as well. But it's also really clear that there's a difference between a split happens among the women. Because it's, according to John, Mary, it does seem like at this point he's just saying Mary Magdalene. She sees the tomb and leaves. The other women appear to go in. She runs off to tell Peter and John they're still there. After she tells Peter and John, they run to the tomb. She comes behind them. By the time Peter and John get there, the other women are gone. They've seen the angels there. They've left. And at some point, they see Jesus. Then Peter and John get there. They go in and look. They leave. Mary's still standing there by herself. She sees Jesus. She goes and tells the disciples. Right? This works. It's not that hard to construct the situation. So it's also very possible they may have left as a group and not arrived together. They may have arrived together and left in different increments. Right? It's clear that that there's a difference with regard to she didn't see the angels yet. She sees them later. She also sees two angels, but at a different time than the other women do. And one of the reasons you can tell is because in her encounter with the angels, when she peers into the tomb and doesn't go in there, they say something different to her. Like the other three Gospels, when they tell us what the angels said, they're telling us the same thing. And it's also super possible that that there was also separate groups, like the women. These two may have gone in, and then later these two. And the angels may have said the same thing. They have the same message to announce. It's not that weird that they would have repeated it. Or they may have, the other group other than Mary may have gone in together and heard it once. Remember, all you need is plausibility here. We don't have to know exactly how the events fit together. In order for them to say that it contradicts, they have to prove that there is absolutely no plausible explanation. That doesn't work with the number of women. How about when they came? Is there a contradiction there? No, certainly not. This is the most ridiculous one. They try to make hay out of this too. So see the tomb. Oh, sorry, I have the wrong place. Toward dawn, okay, when the sun had risen, early dawn, and early while it was still dark. A few things. First of all, when the sun has just risen, could you still refer to it as being still dark? Yes, you could. Absolutely. Especially if you're in a garden and there's things in the way. Secondly, is it super possible that they could have left while it was dark and gotten there after the sun had risen? Duh, right? I don't know exactly how far the trip was, but they're walking, right? It's probably at least 10, 15 minutes that they're walking, and they could have left right before the sun came up and gotten there right after it did. In fact, it does appear to be what happened. And that's pretty fitting symbolically. That's part of the reason why they all mention it. The gospel writers aren't all mentioning the time in order to give us chronology. That's not their main focus. They're all mentioning the time because it's just when the sun rises. And it's that picture of light and the resurrection of Jesus. And also remember that this is the first day of the week, which is when God made light. They're doing this on purpose for theological reasons. Okay, why do they come? Obviously no contradiction there. Two of them don't really mention it. I have literally, one of them doesn't mention it. I have literally heard people try to make it contradictory here too, though. Because they're like, well, the first one says they went to see the body. And the other two that they went to anoint the body. Really? Who did they meet? Is there a contradiction there? If you want to be ridiculous. Yeah, for a couple reasons. First of all, they'll be like, well, this one said they saw one angel, and this one said they saw two, and this guy said an angel, and this guy said man. Well, we've already talked about why man and angel are not necessarily mutually exclusive terms. especially because in Greek, the term that's being used isn't like, it's not like it says a male of the human species. That's not what the word means. It can be used of just like a person. Somebody who has, like to us, that's only a human because the only, like on earth, the only entities that you would call a person that has a personhood are humans. But angels have their own distinct personality as well. They're rational and spiritual beings. And also, obviously, God does. But anyway, also we already mentioned too, there's various possibilities with the numbers. Just like with the women, just because one says one doesn't mean there weren't two. Could have been two. And for whatever reason, he just only mentions one of them. It also can be a reference to the different groups, right? They could be going in at different times, seeing different numbers on it. Plausible. And again, that's all you need. What did they do? Contradiction there? What would they claim? What would somebody claim might be the contradiction?
One group says they didn't tell anybody, and then the others said they weren't told.
Right. And I think the obvious answer to that is just a timing thing, right? He doesn't tell us when they went and told, you know? We don't know how quickly they went back and told the disciples. We know what happened that day, that this happened. But, so Mary goes and tells Peter and John. Later she goes and tells the others. These other women apparently go and tell them too, but maybe they didn't at first. Maybe they sat around for a while. They're just stunned. Maybe they went home for a while and then went over there. Eventually they tell. Mark is emphasizing they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. That didn't last forever, obviously. That's just a timing thing. Question 4. How can these differences be explained to someone for whom this is a stumbling block? We kind of did this already. Which women? What was their purpose? When did they come into the tomb? Angel or man? How many? Did they tell the disciples or not? I'm trying to see if there's anything I need to add here.
Was it during the same time then that, I don't know, maybe it was one of the Marys that saw Jesus but didn't know it was Jesus?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking. So Mary Magdalene is that one. But so that's when she comes back to the tomb. She looks in, sees the two angels, doesn't realize that they're angels, clearly. She's not like astounded by this. Then she turns and sees Jesus, doesn't know it's Jesus right away. And then after he reveals himself to her, and they talk, and she goes back and tells the disciples. One note here, in the teacher's notes, that he mentions that the tomb may have been as much as 2 miles from their homes. We have some fairly good ideas about where the tomb was. We don't know exactly, but we have some pretty good ideas. I already mentioned that. Matter of perspective with the number of angels and men, and did they tell the disciples or not? They didn't speak on the way. They didn't speak at first, but eventually they did. So, all right.
Another stumbling block.
Yeah.
The fact that Mary Magdalene didn't realize what they were I don't know.
What the angels were?
Yeah, or
Well,
even you know what I mean. I
sure.
feel like that could be one of their things to be how would you not
Sure.
know it was Jesus? It's well, yeah, you don't believe in the supernatural, or
Sure.
that event. So how are you going to fully understand this when you don't want to?
There's-
I feel like that's another kind of big.
For sure. And I think to those 2 points, there are also a couple of very, I think, easy possible answers as well. For one thing, when Mary stooped to look into the tomb and she saw the 2 men, she is A, peering into a cave from outside, and B, crying. So, not that crazy, even from just any orderly thing, just normal thing that she may not have noticed. It also may be that they just chose not to have their clothing be dazzling at that point, right? And when she turns and doesn't recognize Jesus, that's a consistent theme in the resurrection appearances. The Emmaus disciples don't recognize him either. And if you remember, it's because he didn't want them to at first. So there's a couple of possibilities with that. One, Jesus is intentionally, in some sort of supernatural way, not allowing people to recognize him at first. B, in his resurrection appearance, he looks a little different. Also possible. C, they just aren't expecting to see him. And again, she's crying. She maybe isn't even really looking at him. That wouldn't be that weird, right? She's there, she's a mess. There's this person there. It's not wouldn't even be that weird. She never even looked him in the face, right? So those are all possibilities. Mark 16:9-14. We read some of these already. Look at this again. And what resurrection accounts from the other Gospels do these verses support? Let's look at verses 9-11. I'm going to look at, I think he has a note here on this. Yeah. Verses 9-11, I'll read those ones. Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him as they mourned and wept. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. Which other account does that support? John's, right? Yeah, of Mary Magdalene specifically seen. I don't know who. Dan, you want to read 12 and verses 12 and 13 there?
In
Mark 16.
which verses?
12 and 13, please.
Henry.
Yeah.
Pages are sticking on you.
After these things, he appeared in another form to 2 of them, as they were walking into the country. And they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them.
Okay, which resurrection appearance is that referring to?
The Emmaus.
The Emmaus disciples, yeah. And verse 14, Chris?
Afterward, he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table. And he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen.
Okay, which one is that referring to? Yeah, in the upper room. Yep. Okay, now let's think about these things that we won't reread all 4 of them. We don't have the time to do that right now, but think about the 4 accounts we read, and think about the similarities among the 4 accounts. So first of all, what day was it? They all agree, right? Sunday. Okay, where was the stone when they came to the tomb?
He rolled away.
Rolled away. Was Jesus there?
No.
Nope. And what was the message?
That he's risen.
Yeah, he's risen. He is not here. He's risen. Now, what can we learn from the study of the similarities of these 4 accounts?
Essentially, they're saying the same thing.
They're all saying the same thing. Yeah. But at the same time, they are not saying the same thing in some like robotic sort of way where like, okay, if you were a teacher and you got 4 accounts that were all exactly the same, you might have questions. You're gonna this reminds me, when I was in high school, I'm trying to remember the details of this. There was some people, I remember how this happened. Okay, so like somebody I knew at first got in trouble because she and another student had turned in an essay that was like exactly the same. Okay. What had happened, so eventually she was not in trouble. The other person was in trouble. So the other person took her essay from her room and copied it word for word and turned it in as her own. Which is just so dumb. It's hard to wrap your mind around, right? Like, obviously you're going to get caught. You can't. Right? Okay. There is a certain veracity added to the witness of the apostles simply in the fact that they're not exactly the same. They have different viewpoints of this. They're telling different aspects of this. They're emphasizing different parts of this. But they're also all telling the same story. There are no contradictions in the important details, and there aren't actually any real contradictions at all. They're just looking at it from a different perspective. What extra biblical sources support the accounts of the four Gospels? Okay, so this is just, well, some information I can fill in for you here. First of all, Josephus, I mentioned some of this before, a Jewish historian, not a Christian. So he does not have any bias towards supporting Christianity, right? In fact, it's the other way around, right? Although he's fairly unbiased as far as historians go. Who lived at the end of the 1st century, wrote, "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. This man was the Christ. And when Pilate condemned him to the cross, upon his impeachment by the principal men among us, those who had loved him from the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive on the 3rd day. The divine prophets have spoken these and thousands of other wonderful things about him, and even now the race of Christians, so named from him, has not died out." By the way, you read that and you're like, wait, he wasn't a Christian? Kind of sounds like he was. I don't know the details about that, but apparently he's not a Christian, but maybe he's just saying what they said about him. But he's stating it as fact. Tacitus, a Roman historian who lived between 56 and 120 AD. But notice how early those both are. Very early extra-biblical sources. Josephus, before 100 AD. And Tacitus, also living between 56 and 120 AD, wrote, "Nero fastened the guilt, for a certain event, on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus," that's Christ, "from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome." What does he mean, a most mischievous superstition?
That he rose again.
That he rose from the dead. That's what he means. That's what the Christians are saying. And the Romans view this as an abomination, as a mischievous superstition. Interestingly enough, they also called the Christians atheists because they only worship the one God.
Oh.
Instead of many. It's a little ridiculous, but... So, yeah, you have good extra-biblical witnesses, but the four gospel writers are obviously the best witnesses here. And if somebody was going to say to you, well, you got to throw out the gospel writers because, they're biased, that's nonsense. You don't throw out witnesses because they say the thing happened. That's begging the question. So, anyway, but yeah, it's kind of helpful to have those two extra ones who are not Christians, and one of them is extremely hostile towards Christians, yet in his writing confirms what we're talking about. So, any other questions?
Why was it Jesus that said to Mary Magdalene in Aramaic?
Rabboni. Yeah.
What's significant about Aramaic?
Well, it's probably, we don't know this for sure, but there's a decent chance it's the main language of conversation among Jesus and his disciples. Why exactly John records that, I haven't given a lot of thought to that. And maybe just a personal touch, emphasizing this personal relationship between them, and also the relationship of a teacher and a disciple. But yeah, we're pretty sure that they didn't converse much in Hebrew, but in Aramaic, which is a kind of mixed up bag of Hebrew and some of the other things. And then sometimes they certainly would have also spoken to one another in Greek. Yeah. You know what? One thing that does emphasize is it emphasizes that the gospel was written in Greek. There are some people out there who like to suggest that it was originally written. They say this about one of the other gospels, I think, mostly. They want to say it was originally written in Aramaic and it was translated into Greek, and there's not good evidence for that. And certainly this is good proof that's not true. You other thoughts? All right, let's close with a bit of doxology. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here